Morning, it's Hazel Jarvis, it's Art Online, and today we're looking at contrast and we're looking at chickens. And here is the basic pencil drawing. When it comes to drawing your chickens, they're fortunately a pretty basic shape. I start with a semicircle like this. I add a little bit of a square head like so, and a tail. And there is my chicken, although I give it a little bit of bounce into the shape. Maybe make that tail a little smaller, like that. So here is my final pencil sketch. So now I look at my reference picture and I decide that I will start with the largest areas first. So I'm going to mix up some colour for the back wall and start. The back wall is going to be a combination of my yellow ochre, which is number 14, and a little bit of my lavender, number 61. I'm going to put that same mix on the rim of the water barrel. So I have rather a large area of water to cover. So I'm going to mix in this little pot here just a little bit of water so that I have, or a little bit of paint mix, so that I have enough to cover the water area. So I have about a teaspoon worth of paint mix here, and I think this should be enough. It's the same yellow ochre and periwinkle mix that we used for the wall. And you're going to paint this in as quickly as you can so that you don't get any hard lines. You can see how very wet I like to paint to start with. While the rim of the barrel is still wet, I'm going to put just a touch more yellow ochre in, just to sort of brighten that and make it a little bit more interesting. With what's left of my paint mix, I mix in some burnt sienna, 46, Van Dyke Brown, 47, and now we paint in the side of the water bath. For the side of the wall, I know I'm going to need a lot of paint, so I'm going to start with about 2 or 3 tablespoons of water in my little jar, and I'm going to mix up a nice purple blue, and into that I'm going to add a tiny touch of ink while everything is still wet. So I have mixed up a lovely dark blue, and that is 66, it's indigo 67, and it's a little bit of deep purple 38, and some 64, and that's going onto the wall here. And then we will, while it's wet, we will touch in a tiny bit of black because we want a ton of contrast. And I'm going to switch to a large brush, which is a 3/4 inch wash brush. We're going to just lay on that wonderful blue-purple mix. And I work pretty wet, just around the edge of my cockerel. While it's still wet, I put a tiny, tiny bit of ink into the cap of my ink bottle. I dip my brush in, and then I just touch in the ink around the bird and let it travel. I rinse my brush in the water to get all the ink off, and then I can go back in with the blue, and if I want I can just touch a little bit more blue into the ink. So at this point everything is very, very wet, so now is a good time to take a step backwards and perhaps go and make some tea or coffee. If you have any areas that you see after a couple of minutes are still shiny and you think, gosh, they'll never dry, I take a tiny bit of paper towel and just press it lightly in and soak up a little bit of that extra paint. But you want to do this carefully. This took a good 10 to 15 minutes to dry, and you'll see that the paint and the ink dries much lighter, so we may want to go back and do a second layer, but we'll wait on that. At this point, I want to take my eraser, clean up my pencil line, and pay some attention to the chickens. So I'm going to start by putting in the beaks and the foot of this middle chicken. Beak goes in. Like that. I'm going to just lighten that mix a tiny bit, put a little bit of orangey in for the foot, which comes in like this, just on top of the barrel. And I'm going to use that same colour for the beak of my cockerel. We'll switch to red now, maybe number 30, and we'll put in the gizzard and the combs. So that's a little bit of a wave, a little bit for the crown over here. Something for under the beak and around the eye. So now your birds assume a definite personality and a definite presence. We'll go back to our lavender and yellow ochre mix and just start to put in some suggestions of the feathers. So I'm stroking in the wing here, and then I'm going to go back to my mix. I'm going to add a tiny bit of black to that mix, and under here, under the body, I'm going just a little bit darker. But for the most part, just for the white, I'm going to use the white of the paper so that the bird stands out against the background. Middle bird looks like this. We can't really paint here because this is wet, so we're going to put in the nice dark bird over here. So I mix my blue with my black and my brown and just stroking that hen. And I want to be sure that his back really overlaps over the edge of the water butt so it looks as if he's perched on it. And when this is completely dry, I'll tuck in just the suggestion of a claw. So there he is. Black mix still to hand. I'm going to put in a little bit round the tail of this middle chicken. A little bit around the tail of this middle chicken. And I'm going to put in a little on my cockerel. I want to pause here for a moment to let the chickens dry before I add in the final details, but you'll see how nicely the composition is coming, and actually we're almost there. So in terms of details, we're going to outline the eye and leave just a little bit of white showing, but the eye is going to go in. Now we'll boost up the red, a little bit more red, number 30. I'm going to add a little bit more paint down here just to push the first front bird forward. We're going to tighten up this one's foot. Just give it a little bit of texture and suggest a claw. And we're going to put in just the suggestion of a claw over here on the dark one, like this. The birds are definitely taking shape now. We're going back to our blue mix and we're going to put some shadow on this back wall. I'd like to put some more reflection here, but the chest is still too wet, so I'm going to hold off on that particular area for a minute or two. I'm going to put just a few ripples of the water down here, down by my black chicken. A little bit of shadow on the far side of the water butt too. So I'm going to mix burnt sienna and Van Dyke brown and a little bit of green, number 50, to give it a sort of a rusty look. And I'm just going to start washing on that darker colour. I want to darken this side of the water butt, so I'm going to mix up some more brown to lay that on top. So because this painting is all about contrast, I'm now going to make my wall much darker. So back to my original mix, and I've mixed in a ton more of the same blues, especially the indigo, and I'm just going to brush on this darker color. So I've painted all around my cockerel, and you can see just how very wet that is. So we're going to have to just sit and let it dry for a little while. So still wet, but I just want to work a tiny bit more while I have the paint. I want to bump up the contrast a little bit more. I want to go in again with the water barrel, into the water, get those reflections in. So just putting in the final touches, the final darks. So the finished painting still needs a moment to dry, so I'll photograph it for you as soon as it is dry. But I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I can't wait to see what you do.